Nauru. This tiny island nation, a speck of land in the vast Pacific Ocean, was once a paradise. It was also an economic powerhouse. For a brief, shining moment, Nauru was the envy of the world. Why? Bird poop, more specifically phosphate, a prized fertilizer ingredient found in the droppings of seabirds, accumulated over millennia. The discovery of phosphate in 1900 transformed Nauru's fate. Suddenly, this tiny island, barely 8 square miles, was thrust onto the world stage. Nauru became synonymous with wealth beyond measure. Its per capita income soared, surpassing even the oil-rich nations of the Middle East. Nauruans were among the wealthiest people on the planet, but like all good things, the phosphate boom couldn't last forever. By the 1990s, the once abundant phosphate reserves were dwindling. Decades of mining had stripped the island bare. The land, once fertile and green, now resembled a moonscape. The economic engine that had driven Nauru to such heights sputtered and stalled. The consequences were swift and brutal. The wealth that had flowed so freely dried up, leaving behind a trail of economic devastation. The collapse of the phosphate industry left Nauru reeling. The government scrambled to find new sources of income, but their efforts proved largely futile. Nauru's economic miracle had devolved into a cautionary tale of squandered riches and environmental devastation. With its phosphate riches depleted, Nauru found itself adrift in a sea of economic uncertainty. Desperate for revenue, the government embarked on a series of ill-fated ventures. They established a notoriously opaque offshore banking system, transforming the island into a haven for money laundering and tax evasion. They even resorted to selling passports to foreign nationals, a desperate attempt to inject cash into the struggling economy. These measures, however, proved unsustainable. International pressure forced Nauru to abandon its offshore banking ambitions. The passport-selling scheme, while lucrative for a time, ultimately backfired, tarnishing the island's reputation. Nauru's search for a new economic identity had hit another dead end. In a strange twist of fate, Australia, the former colonial power, emerged as Nauru's unlikely savior. In the early 2000s, Australia, grappling with a surge in asylum seekers, struck a controversial deal with Nauru. In exchange for much-needed financial aid, Nauru agreed to host an offshore detention centre for Australia's unwanted migrants. The deal, widely condemned by human rights groups, provided a lifeline to Nauru's struggling economy. Today, Nauru remains heavily reliant on Australian aid. The detention centre, a source of constant controversy, continues to generate much-needed revenue for the island nation. But this dependence on Australia comes at a cost. Nauru, once a proud and independent nation, now finds itself beholden to its former colonial master. Nauru's strategic location in the Pacific Ocean, once a footnote in its history, has taken on new significance in the 21st century. The island nation finds itself caught in a geopolitical tug-of-war between major powers vying for influence in the region. On one side is China, eager to expand its footprint in the Pacific. On the other side is Australia, determined to maintain its dominance and counter China's growing influence. China, with its vast economic resources, has been aggressively courting Pacific Island nations, including Nauru. It has poured millions into infrastructure projects, offered generous loans, and increased trade ties. Nauru, desperate for investment and wary of relying solely on Australia, has welcomed China's advances. Australia, however, views China's growing influence with alarm. It sees China's Pacific push as a direct threat to its own strategic interests. In response, Australia has stepped up its own engagement with Nauru and other Pacific Island nations. It has increased aid, strengthened security ties, and sought to counter China's narrative. The Australia-Nauru relationship, however, is a complex one. Nauru, while grateful for Australian aid, is also wary of becoming overly reliant on its former colonial ruler. It is a delicate balancing act for Nauru, navigating the competing interests of these geopolitical heavyweights. Nauru, like many other island nations, faces an existential threat: climate change. Rising sea levels, more frequent and intense storms, and ocean acidification pose a direct threat to the island's very existence. The environmental degradation caused by decades of phosphate mining has left Nauru particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Adding to Nauru's woes are a host of public health challenges. The island has one of the highest rates of obesity and diabetes in the world. Smoking is rampant, and access to clean water and sanitation remains a challenge. The legacy of phosphate mining continues to haunt Nauru, with lingering concerns about the long-term health effects of environmental contamination. Despite these challenges, the spirit of the Nauruan people remains unbroken. They are resilient people accustomed to overcoming adversity, but their future hangs in the balance. The international community must do more to support Nauru and other vulnerable island nations as they grapple with the impacts of climate change, public health crises, and the lingering effects of colonialism. The fate of Nauru is a reminder that even in the 21st century, the echoes of the past continue to shape the present and the future.